Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna,
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om, everyone. Okay, I must say this, okay. Now I saw somebody who's joined here today. Must be one of the new members who's joined this week because I have not seen this earlier. The name that comes up is iPhone De Didi. So he or she is asking for an iPhone, I guess. You must identify yourself sometime later. So this was a nice way to start today. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Sarika to start with the invocation.
Sahana bhavatu, sahanau punattu, sahaviryam karavavahai, tejasvinavati namastu, ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Gita Dhyanam. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Grahitam Puranamunna Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashaadhyayini Amba Tvamanusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini. Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravindaya Tapatra Nitra Yena Tvaya Bharata Talya Purnaha Prajwalito Jnanamaya Pradipa Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vaitrika Parnaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamritaduhe Namaha. Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogda Gopalanandana Partho Vatsasudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahat Vasudevasudam Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Nam Vande Jagadgurum Bhishmadronatata Jayat Dratajala Gandharani Lotpala Shalyagrahavati Kripena Vahani Karnena Velakula Ashwathama Vikarna Ghora Makara Duryodhanavartini Sotirna Kalu Pandavai Rananari Kaivartaka Keshava Parasharya Vachas Saroja Mamalam Gitartha Gandotkatam Nana Jnana Gakesharam Harikata Sambodhana Bodhitam लोके सज्जन षट्परैरहरः प्रीपीयमानं मुदा भूयाद् भारत पङ्कजं कलिमला प्रध्वंसि न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयति गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम् यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदे साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदे गायन्ति यं सामगा ध्यानावस्थिततत्कतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरासुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः
Hari Om. So we saw last time that Sanjaya, he distinctly portrays the difference in terms of the mental states in the Kaurava ranks and the Pandava ranks, starting with Duryodhana and Arjuna. So Duryodhana, he was seemingly frightened, very insecure, doubting. He was doubting his own guru even before the war began. And Bhishma actually stops him by playing the war bugle, the conches. And on the other hand, Arjuna was in a ferocious mood and he wanted to take his Ratha to the middle of the battlefield. And he actually, with all the regard and the respect that he has for Sri Krishna, he commands his charioteer to take the Ratha to the middle of the battlefield. Now, this kind of a mental state had just not set in at the beginning of the war. This had been going on for quite some time. As we all know, the Pandavas were banished to a 13-year exile after they had lost the dice game, after Yudhishthira had lost the dice game. And the 13th year was supposed to be spent incognito. And if they had been discovered in the 13th year, they would need to go and spend another 13 years in exile, 12 of which in the forest and the last year incognito again. So as the exile period started getting over, Duryodhana's nervousness and fear started increasing. And even though it was not an acceptable practice, it was not the norm, forget about not being the norm, it was not a done thing, he engaged spies to make sure that in the 13th year, he will be able to find out where the Pandavas are and expose them. So he gave it his all to ensure that he will expose them in the 13th year. So in that sense, because of his nervousness, because of his fear, he had started preparations to ensure that they don't come back and they have to go away for another 30 years. On the other hand, Arjuna and the other Pandavas had started preparing for war because they knew and they sensed that, knowing Duryodhana very well, that when they come back, it's not like Duryodhana is going to give back their kingdom on a platter. It's not like the subjects, the citizens of the state are going to be pleased that, Duryodhana is giving them away, and everyone is expecting that that's not what he is going to do. And war is almost inevitable. And because of which they had started preparing themselves, including Arjuna going to the heavens to attain various weaponry from the gods. So, he actually traveled, left his family and went to acquire weapons in preparation for the war. So this kind of change or difference in mental attitude among both the forces was quite apparent. It was building up, and we saw in the last satsang that it came to the fore, both in terms of the way Duryodhana acted when he went up to his Gurudev Dronacharya, and in the way Arjuna acted when he ordered Sri Krishna to take his Ratha or the chariot to the middle of the battlefield. So that was very apparent. Now, the other thing that came out in the last class was that the sound of conches itself, and especially the conches of the Pandavas had names with certain meanings, and that was heart-shattering for the Kaurava forces. And what do we mean by heart-shattering? Now, the heart, in different contexts can be understood differently. In biological terms, when you read biology, it's an organ. It's an internal organ that pumps blood throughout the body. In literature, the heart represents the mind and the intellect. And we have discussed a lot about the mind and the intellect. And in philosophy, the heart represents the inner core or the consciousness. In this case, when we say that the hearts of the Kaurava forces were shattered by the tumultuous blowing of conches and the war celebrations happening in the Pandava ranks, what we mean is that the organ itself, there was nothing happening to it. But the mind and the intellect were shattered, and the inner core or their consciousness was thoroughly shaken. And we also saw last time that what did Sri Krishna do when Arjuna commanded him to take the chariot to the center of the battlefield? And the purpose given by Arjuna was that I want to inspect these forces, the Kaurava forces. I want to see who these people are who dare to fight against me. And I want to choose my targets, and I want to see who I'm going to kill. That is the reason he gave to Sri Krishna to take the chariot to the middle of the battlefield. And what did Sri Krishna do? He took the chariot right in front of Bhima and Dronacharya, Pramuthakaha. So, where there is eye contact possible between Arjuna, his grandsire who is Bhishma, and Dronacharya who is his Gurudev. So that eye contact obviously had an impact, and we will come to that a little later. But before that, let us talk a little bit about the concept of delusion, which is known as moha. Last time we talked a little bit about the concept of dharma. This time we'll focus on delusion. Delusion essentially means not seeing things as they are, imagining them to be different from what their real nature is. So there is, whatever there is that somebody is observing, perceiving, seeing, there is a reality about that object or subject. But when the mind forces a person to observe and imagine it to be different from what it really is, then we say that that person is deluded. And all of us, at some stage or the other, have some kind of a delusion or the other. For example, smokers of cigarettes think that it relieves, a number of them says that it relieves stress. That's one of the very commonly known delusions. We also saw earlier what the causes of moha were. The causes of moha, number one, shoka or sorrow. The feeling of I and mine, which is aham and mama. The sense of ajnana, the lack of knowledge of anything that is beyond aham and mama. So whatever there is in the world, the object world, which is not me and related to me or mine, is unknown and we are ignorant to it. And why is that? Because we are imprisoned by the body, mind, intellect framework. Because we get encapsulated in our own framework, my way or the highway kind of a thought, we either don't know what is outside of us, or we choose to ignore what is outside of us, or we say, I don't care about anything else. This is it, this is my way, and this is what I have to say. And that results in ajnana or ignorance. There is also a fourth element that causes moha, and that is raga dvesha. Raga dvesha means likes and dislikes. Essentially, whether we have a strong like or a strong dislike to anything, what happens is that when we have strong like for anything, we magnify that virtues of that thing. And when we have a strong dislike for anything, we magnify, or not even magnify, we actually create flaws of that object. So that raga and dvesha also, when we create flaws, when we magnify virtues, which may not really be there, that also leads to delusion. So this reminds me, of, if you have these four, there were these four drunken men and they went to dinner and by the time they were back, they were not very much in their senses, and they had to row their boat back to their respective homes. They were living in a lake house, let us say. Okay, and they got into the boat and they kept rowing, but after about an hour they realized they have not reached home, and they started thinking what's going on. And then they kept rowing, and after a long time of rowing, obviously what happens, it's a physically tiring exercise. So slowly and surely they started coming back into their senses. The high impact of whatever alcohol or madira that they had started wearing away. And then they realized that the boat was anchored to its spot. So even though they were rowing and giving it their physical best, the boat was not moving because it was nicely anchored into the ground. Now, delusion does that. Delusion is an anchor. When a person is deluded, you are so anchored to your personal individual beliefs that you refuse to move out and step out and do anything else, look at anybody else's perspective. And that is something that we should always watch out for. So when Arjuna was taken by Sri Krishna, his charioteer, to the middle of the battlefield, what did he want to see? He wanted to inspect, and he wanted to list out the people that he is going to battle against, list out and mentally make note of the people that he is going to kill. Now let us see what he actually saw. We will read verses 26 and 27.
Tatra pashyat sthitan partha
Tatra pashyat sthitan partha
pitrinath pitamahan
Pitrinath pitamahan
acharyan matulan bhratrun
Acharyan matulan bhratrun
putran pautran sakhim stata
Putran pautran sakhim sthatha
shvashuran suhadrashchaiva
Svashuran shuhadrashchaiva
senayorubhayorapi
Senayorubhayorapi
tan samikshya sa kaunteya
Tan samikshya sa kaunteya
sarvan bandhunavastitan
Sarvan bandhunavastitan
कृपया परया विष्टो
Kripaya paraya vishto
विषीदानिदमब्रवीत्
Vishidanidamabravit
तत्र पश्यात् स्थितान् पार्था पितॄनाथ पितामहान् आचार्यान् मातुलान् भ्रातॄन् पुत्रान् पौत्रान् सखींस्तथा श्वशुरान् सुहद्रश्चैव सेनयोरुभयोरपि तान् समीक्ष्य स कौन्तेय सर्वान् बन्धूनवस्थितान् कृपया परयाविष्टो विषीदानिदमब्रवीत्.
Do you remember Gita Dhyana Shloka? Bhishma Drona Tata Jayatrata Jala. The ferocious elements of the river of war. So Krishna took Arjuna to the center of the battlefield to a very nice vantage point. And did Arjuna see these ferocious elements? Did Arjuna see these elements of the river of war that were out there to swallow him as he traverses through the river? No, he did not see that at all. What he actually saw was his kith and kin. My people, my near and dear, my family, my fathers, my grandfathers, my teachers, my uncles, my brothers, sons, grandsons, friends, in-laws. So he basically saw people who are near and dear to him, and people who he perceived as his own. Remember, aham mama, I and mine. So I am seeing my people. I am not seeing the ferocious elements of the river of war. So perception and perspective, they must go through the filter of dharma. We talked about dharma last time. If perception and perspective do not go through the filter of dharma, then what happens? Swadharma nasha, or dereliction of duty. That is what takes place. So for example, if there is a judge and he is sitting on his throne of judgment, then he needs to keep the law of the land in his mind. He can't look at who is the accused and who is the accuser, or who are the lawyers. The law of the land is most important. His dharma is the law of the land as the judge. A soldier, on the other hand, his eyes and his vision are on the nation that he is from, the country that he belongs to, and the duty that he is doing as the soldier. A doctor or a surgeon, when they are operating, whoever it may be, whether it may be the surgeon's daughter or mother or whoever it may be, is thinking about the Hippocratic Oath, not about who the patient is. For example, when the previous Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, was, sitting Prime Minister, I'm forgetting the name of the doctor. Maybe next time I will find out and let you know. But there was this doctor who operated on a sitting Prime Minister of the country. Now, that's not an easy thing to do, and he's an old man. He's an old man with a serious heart ailment. And then after the surgery was done, he was asked, how is it? What did you feel? You were operating on the Prime Minister of the country. And the doctor said that, once I got into the operation theater, once the lights on top of the table were on, then I don't even know who is in the bed, who is in the operating table. For me, it is my patient and I have to do my job. That is what I was thinking about. It did not even occur to me during that entire process, and it was a long surgery, quite a few hours. And he actually said that throughout that surgery, not even for a second, for a moment, did it occur to me that there was this Prime Minister, serving Prime Minister of India, who was the person that I'm operating. If that had occurred, then probably I would have got nervous and I may not have been able to do my duty. So it is very important that a person puts the aspects that you perceive through the filter of dharma. You will also recollect that we went through the input, process, output, the model that we talked about, that we have studied that in science, and in our first introductory class, we talked about it. There we noticed that the perception happens through our sense organs, and from the sense organs, whatever we perceive goes through the objective mind, and then from the objective mind to our intellect, from the intellect to the subjective mind, because it has been processed through the objective mind and the intellect, and then it goes into through our organs of actions, it gets perpetuated out into the real world in terms of the actions that we take. So this is the process that happens. Now, in Arjuna's case, there was a huge disconnect between his objective mind and his subjective mind. So what had happened in that input, process, output version where the process was taking place in his intellect, a lot of, in that cauldron, a lot of unnecessary things had happened, and because of which he did not see the people who he wanted to inspect when he commanded Sri Krishna to take the Ratha to the middle of the battlefield. So this, in fact, an interesting reference to Arjuna in the verse that we just read is Kunti Putra. This is not Arjuna. This is Kunti Putra, the son of Kunti, who is seeing his fathers and grandfathers and teachers and sons and grandsons and so on, and friends and so on. And when he did that, what happened? What happened was Avishtaha. Avishtaha means something, take possession. Avishtaha means taking possession, acquiring possession. Something took possession of his mind. Kripaya. Kripaya means pity. Or it also can be referred to as compassion. Paraya. Paraya means deep or supreme. So a supreme sense of compassion, a deep sense of pity is what took possession of Arjuna's mind. And when he saw this from his lens of aham and mama, which is I and mine, instead of seeing soldiers, it was not as if he had gone into the middle of the battlefield. It was as if he had gone into a 5-star hotel banquet hall where his entire family was gathering, and it was a get together to celebrate the 100th year of the, of Bhishma Pitamaha, maybe, of the grandsire, and the entire family had gathered to celebrate, and he was looking at all his relatives out there, and then, but suddenly he realized, oh my God, this is not a 5-star hotel and a banquet hall, this is the battlefield. And that flood of pity, that flood of compassion entered his mind. But by the way, this very evident, it is very evident, when you read the Mahabharata, and it is also very evident from what we have gone through till now in the Bhagavad Gita, that this was not an honest emotion. Look at the conflict between this emotion and that emotion which was there when he commanded Sri Krishna. Ratham sthapaya mechyuta. Take my Ratha and place it where I want it to be placed. That emotion and this emotion, where he's almost weeping, there's a big contrast. So obviously, this was not an honest emotion. And even before that, when he, before the war, he was in a very belligerent frame of mind. He wanted to get into the battlefield. He was itching to get into the battlefield. So it's very clear that if you look at the background, this emotion that suddenly came about in his mind was not an honest emotion. So his sense of vanity, that enabled or that caused for him to get imprisoned in that body, mind, intellect framework. And after being imprisoned in that body, mind, intellect, his own, where he started looking at everything as I and my, then he lost the higher sense of purpose, which up until now he had. But at that point in time, he lost it. Now, there is one more meaning of paraya. Paraya also means something that is out of place, which is odd, which is not fitting in. That is also called as paraya. It should not be where it is. Sometimes when you see something, when you go about in the house and you say, that flower vase doesn't look good there, it should be in some other place, right? So it doesn't fit in where you initially saw it. And then you put it in its right place and say, yeah, that's where it should be. So that is also a meaning of paraya. So in that context, so what is indicated here is that this sense of compassion, this deep pity that Arjuna felt did not belong. He was in the middle of a battlefield. The bugles of war had been sounded. People were ready to, their weapons were strung. They were ready to fire their weapons. And at that time, this kind of an emotion is entirely misplaced. Actually, much earlier, when, after the completion of the exile and after the completion of the 13th year in incognito, Sri Krishna had done his duty in terms of painting the real picture to both the Kauravas and the Pandava forces. Very explicitly, he had spoken to them about the consequences of war. And he had explicitly talked about when you will see the dead body of your relative in front of your own eyes. And how will you feel at that time? And at that time, Arjuna was like, I want this war. Duryodhana, of course, was always like, I want this war. And even Dhritarashtra, the blind king, because of his haplessness and his helplessness, even he was like, I want this war. So everybody was wanting the war. But now we have Arjuna, who is completely broken down and is saying that I'm looking at people who are mine, and what do I do? Now we will recite verses 28 to 30, 28, 29 and 30.
Arjuna uvacha.
Arjuna uvacha.
Drishtve svajanam Krishna.
Drishtve svajanam Krishna.
Yuyutsum samupastitam.
Yuyutsum samupastitam.
Sidanti mama gatrani.
Sidanti mama gatrani.
Mukam cha parishushyati.
Mukam cha parishushyati.
Vepatuscha sharire me.
वेपतुश्च शरीरे मे
रोमहर्षाश्च जायते
रोमहर्षाश्च जायते
गान्धीवं स्रंसते हस्तात्
गाण्डीवं संसते हस्तात्
त्वच्चैव परिदह्यते
त्वच्चैव परिदह्यते
न च शक्नोम्यवस्थातुं
न च शक्नोम्यवस्थातुं
भ्रमतीव च मे मनः
भ्रमतीव च मे मनः।
अर्जुन उवाच दृष्ट्वेमं स्वजनं कृष्णा युयुत्सुं समुपस्थितं सीदन्ति मम गात्राणि मुखं च परिपश्यति वेपतुश्च शरीरे मे रोमहर्षाश्च जायते गान्धीवं स्रंसते हस्तात् त्वच्चैव परिदह्यते न च शक्नोम्यवस्थातुं भ्रमतीव च मे मनः.
So there was a particular reason why we recited these three verses together. And that is that in these three verses, we find a beautiful presentation of the various symptoms of sorrow or shoka. So sorrow had crept into Arjuna because not only did he perceive the people that he saw as his own, he also looked at his grandsire, who he was extremely fond of. He looked at his teacher, Dronacharya, who had taught him anything and everything that he knew in life. And then he realized that I am going to be killing these people. And when he realized that, a deep sense of sorrow crept into Arjuna. Not only did it creep into Arjuna, it reached its pinnacle, its acme. And then he started feeling these aspects of sorrow, of sadness, and in the manner, he actually tells Krishna, seeing my own people in this manner, seeing my own people eager to fight, this is how I feel, O Krishna. And he gives out 8 symptoms. So these 3 verses actually give out 8 symptoms of or expressions of shoka or sorrow. The first one is Mama Gatrani Sidanti. Mama is mine. Gatrani Sidanti. My limbs fail me. I'm feeling weak all over. I'm sure all of us have been in moments where we have felt that, that our limbs are weak. They are failing us. Mukham Parishushyati. My mouth is drying up. It is parched. The third one. Sharire me vepatuscha. Sharire is my body, or me sharire, my body, is trembling, is shivering. Like we say, sending shivers up the spine. What he saw sent shivers up his spine, and his body was trembling. Roma harsha jayate. My hair is standing on its end. He was having a hair-raising experience. His hair was standing on its end. Gandivam sramsate hastat. Gandivam is the name of his bow, and it's a very famous bow, Arjuna's bow. His bow was slipping out of his hand. He just couldn't hold on to it. Tvak paridahyate. My skin is sweaty and it is also burning at the same time. Don't we feel that when we are nervous, we feel that sense of heat, and at the same time, we are sweating all over. Na shakyoma avasthatum. I am not able to stand. And the 8th and the final one, me manaha brahmativa. My head is spinning. My mind is whirling. So these are the 8 symptoms that he lists. Now, all of us, when we have that sense of sorrow, when sorrow takes possession, we will feel either most of these, some of these, or in fact, probably all of these sensations that Arjuna just described. And typically they start with your body and then take over your mind also. It's very important to recognize this. And like we have said earlier, Bhagavad Gita is relevant in the times of today also. Sorrow, if it goes to the stage of taking possession, then it becomes very difficult to remove it. So the first sign of sorrow, it is important to throw it out. It's almost like, when you regurgitate the food sometimes, vomit it out, right? The food doesn't even go below your throat, you regurgitate it. So sorrow, when you recognize the initial symptoms, when any of us recognize the initial symptoms of sorrow, it is important to regurgitate it out of our system. Because if it takes possession, if it goes to the extreme of taking possession, then it becomes very difficult. So in the 13th year of the Pandava exile, like I said a little earlier, they had to live in incognito. And if they found out, another 13 years of exile. So the 13th year, the Pandavas spent as domestic servants, as servants in the kingdom of King Virata, which was called Matsya. And Arjuna was disguised as Brihanala, a eunuch, so that they could not find him. There is a story behind it, which we don't have time to go through now. Please do read Mahabharata. I recommended C. Rajagopalachari's Mahabharata. Please do read it. In fact, I will remember to send it to you. I managed to get a soft copy. It's actually available in the net. But if you read the Mahabharata, it's a beautiful long story. Okay. So in that kingdom, in King Virata's kingdom, his wife's brother or his brother-in-law was this person named Kichika, who was the commander-in-chief of the army. And Kichika took fascination. He was not even took fascination. He was smitten by Draupadi, the wife of the Pandavas. And he tried to seduce her. But cut long story short, Bhima killed him. And Kichika, brother-in-law of King Virata, was one of the famous, warriors. Not only that, a very well-known wrestler. Only a few people, it was known, could kill him. And one of them was Bhima. When the news of this death spread, immediately Duryodhana and Shakuni started calculating who it could be. And they ruled out everyone else. And the only person that could have killed him was Bhima. And Duryodhana was absolutely gloating. He was like, I'm going to catch these guys now. And we are going to send them on 13 more years of exile. So it could have been no one else. Now we know where they are. Let's launch a war against King Virat, against Matsya, and we will launch a battle and we will expose the Pandavas. And it was done pretty cleverly. They said that one part of the army of the Kauravas will go from one side, the north, and they will take away all of the army of Matsya kingdom, because when a war is being launched or an attack is being launched, the army is going to go out and defend. And when the army goes out to defend, a few of the part of the Kaurava army, along with the most important generals, the Maharathas, we talked about the meaning of Maharathas last time, we will all take the southern flank and we will attack the kingdom and we will expose the Pandavas who are hiding there. So this was the grand plan. Now, the four Pandavas except Arjuna, because Arjuna was disguised as a eunuch. So the other four Pandavas went along with King Virat to the northern flank to defend against the attack that was launched. Arjuna stayed back in the kingdom. That, by the way, attack was defeated. But before that army could come back, and while that war was being fought, Duryodhana, along with, look at the Maharathas who were there. Bhishma was there, Dronacharya was there, Kripacharya was there, Duryodhana was there, and Karna was there. All these people, they launched an attack from the southern flank along with an army. And the only person to defend the kingdom was King Virat's son, was the only person. And Draupadi advised him to take Arjuna, that is Brihanala, as his charioteer. And she convinced him that he is the best charioteer that you can find. So initially reluctantly, but because he had no choice, he took Brihanala, the eunuch, who was Arjuna disguised as the charioteer. And then when he saw who was the people that he was going to fight, he was in a very nervous state himself. And at that time, Arjuna gave him the confidence, and Arjuna fought with all these Maharathas and defeated all of them. Not only he defeated all of them, disguised as Brihanala, he also was able to, in Sanskrit they say murchit, he was able to get them into an unconscious state, dilapidated condition, and was able to, in those days, one of the signs of victory was if you can take over the garment, the shawl that the warrior is wearing. So he got the shawls of all these Maharathas removed as a souvenir and took it back. So this Arjuna, who was single-handedly able to defeat all of them, and by the way, by the time that this war happened and Arjuna defeated them, as per the calculations of astrology, the 13-year had got over. So he was secure. So even though he was physically disguised, he knew that all of them would know who he really is. And not only that, he was fighting with his own battle gear, in his own chariot, with his own bow, and everyone knew that this was Arjuna. But from a time perspective, the 13 years were over. Now, the relevance of the story here is Arjuna single-handedly defeated Bhishma, Drona, Kripacharya, Duryodhana, Karna in that battle, took away their garment, their shawls. And that same Arjuna, standing in the middle of the Kurukshetra battlefield, was trembling. The bow was slipping out of his hand, and he was not able to fight. Some kind of a symptom of neurosis was arising in him, all because of the sorrow. So the three verses talk to us about what sorrow can do to a human being. And Arjuna was not just an ordinary human being. He was one of the best warriors. He was the best warrior of that time. We will now go to the next verse and see what happens next.
Nimittani cha pashyami.
Nimittani cha pashyami.
Viparitani Keshava.
Viparitani Keshava.
Nacha Shreyo Nupashyami.
Nacha Shreyo Nupashyami.
Hatva Swajanamahave.
Hatva Swajanamahave.
Nimittani cha pashyami. Viparitani Keshava. Nacha Shreyo Nupashyami. Hatva Swajanamahave.
So, Nimittani. Nimittani means omens. So, Arjuna is telling Sri Krishna, "O Kesava, I am seeing," he uses the term Kesava, "I am seeing omens. I am seeing omens that are going to be bad. Nor do I see any good. Nacha Shreyo. There is, what is the good? I don't see any good in killing my own kinsman. Hatva Swajanam Ahave. Killing my own kinsman in battle, I don't see any good coming out of it." Now, we have seen earlier and we have talked about how Shoka leads to Moha and delusion. Now, bad omens, I see bad omens, and I do not see any good coming out of killing my own, are the first deluded statements that Arjuna makes. So we now see the transition from sorrow to delusion, from Shoka to Moha. Delusion is wrong thinking, mistaken belief. We saw that. And the sorrow, the 8 signs of sorrow that we just saw that Arjuna went through, that opens the floodgates of delusion for him. And he gets into this mistaken belief or wrong thinking. And the first wave of this delusion is, I am seeing bad omens and I do not see any good coming out of it. Now, good can be of 2 types. The Shreyas can be of 2 types. One is Drishtya. Drishta means what is seen, what we see and experience here and now, right in front of us. Like I am seeing Sridhar, who always reminds all of us to switch off our video. His video is on. I am Drishtva, seeing Sridhar with his video on. And the other type of good is Adrishta. Adishtra means unseen. Unseen means what we see and experience in the future, including in our mythology, including what could be in the future, not in this life, but in subsequent lives. What Arjuna is referring to here as Shreyas, that he is not seeing any good, that he is referring to the Adrishta Shreyas or Adishtra, what is going to happen in the future, and he does not see any good in it. Now, a deluded person, you may be deluded, a person may be deluded, but that doesn't mean that the human being cannot make logical arguments. In fact, people with delusion make fantastic logical arguments, extremely good logical arguments. You know why? Because they are deep-rooted, anchored. Remember I talked about that boat getting anchored? They are deeply anchored in their thought process. And with that strength of anchoring, they can come up with some fantastic arguments. So Arjuna is going to come up with some fantastic arguments from his position of delusion. But at the same time, these logical arguments are not effective, because logic, though may be a very stable aspect, is not the perfect thing to determine what is right and what is wrong. If you use only logic to say what is right and what is wrong, that can often go wrong. This is because, why is that? Because typically logic gets twisted in our own minds. The way we perceive it, the way my mind is conditioned, the way my mind is perceiving something, my logic is based on that. And because my logic is based on that, it may not be true in terms of what is right and wrong in the perspective of the environment. So we will now see the logical arguments based out of delusion that Arjuna starts making. We'll read verse 32.
Nakangshe vijayam Krishna.
Nakangshe vijayam Krishna.
Nacharajyam sukhani cha.
Nacharajyam sukhani cha.
Kim no rajyena govinda.
Kim no rajyena govinda.
Kim bhogair jivitena va.
Kim bhogair jivitena va.
Nakangshe vijayam Krishna. Nacharajyam sukhani cha. Kim no rajyena govinda. Kim bhogair jivitena va.
So Arjuna has now started discussing the fruits of action, the phala. Remember we talked about prayojana when we talked about Anubandha Chatushtayam, the fourfold connections in terms of what we do. Adhikari. So Arjuna here is obviously thinking that he is the Adhikari, not even Sri Krishna who is his charioteer, right? Vishaya, in this case, the Vishaya is, I should not be fighting the war, or should I be? But he is very clear that he should not be. Sambandha, the relations. So he is actually seeing his personal sambandhas. And he is now talking to Krishna about the prayojana, which is the phala of what we are going to do. Now, the desired phala, the desired outcome, that determines the means that are employed to achieve that desired outcome. So if I have a goal, I have to achieve a goal. I know what the goal is. I will, based on the goal, I will determine what are the steps that I will take to reach that goal. So when we set goals in our corporation, in our organization, when we set goals for our family, and based on that goal, we say that this is what we would do. So for example, if you along with your child set a goal that the child needs to get 90% in her exam, then you will say that, hey, to get that 90%, you need to study 4 hours a day or 5 hours a day, right? So the action that we take is dependent or determined by the goal that we have set. And if there is some goal, if my daughter tells me, I don't want 80%, forget it. I'm going to go out and play. Why? I don't want 80%, daddy. Why are you asking me to, sit and study 4 hours when I don't even want it? That is exactly what Arjuna does now. So Arjuna tells Krishna that I don't want this. I don't desire any victory. I don't desire any kingdom. I don't desire anything that comes, the joys that come out of the kingdom and the victory. I don't want any of that. And because I don't want any of that, I don't need to fight this battle. It's futile. It's a waste of time. Now, please remember that he's talking about, I don't want victory. I don't want kingdom. Doesn't know, has no concept of, because he's so imprisoned in his own body, mind, intellect framework, he doesn't know the people who are waiting out there in their homes. His own wife, Draupadi, who was insulted, dragged into the court, and so on and so forth, to whom he has made a promise. All of that has escaped his mind. He's that much completely deluded. And he says, I don't want any of this, so I'm not going to fight. We'll go to verse 33.
येषामर्थे काङ्क्षितं नो
येषामर्थे काङ्क्षितं नो
राज्यं भोगा सुखानि च
राज्यं भोगा सुखानि च
तैमावस्थिता युद्धे
तैमावस्थिता युद्धे
प्राणां त्यक्त्वा धनानि च
प्राणां त्यक्त्वा धनानि च
येषामर्थे काङ्क्षितं नो राज्यं भोगा सुखानि च तैमावस्थिता युद्धे प्राणां त्यक्त्वा धनानि च.
Let's also read verse 34.
आचार्य पितरः पुत्रा
आचार्य पितरः पुत्रा
तथैव च पितामहः
तथैव च पितामहः
मातुला स्वसुरा पौत्रा
मातुला स्वसुरा पौत्रा
श्याला सम्बन्धनस्थिता
श्याला सम्बन्धनस्थिता
आचार्य पितरः पुत्रा तथैव च पितामहः मातुलः स्वसुरा पौत्रा श्याला सम्बन्धनस्थिता.
So here he is talking about the people who in his mind are the ones who are relevant. So in the first verse he says, for them, for whose sake, those people for whose sake we desire the kingdom. We desire the enjoyment. We desire the pleasures. Bhoga, pleasure. They are standing here in front of us in battle gear. They have renounced their life. They know that they have come here to die. They have renounced their wealth. They know that they are not going to get any wealth after all this. And these are the people we are fighting this war for. And he's referring to both sides of the army, by the way. Okay? He completely forgets about the people who are not in the battlefield. And then deluded people repeat themselves again and again and again. Then he again says exactly the same thing that he started off with, which is teachers, fathers, grandfathers, sons, grandsons, maternal uncles, father-in-laws, brother-in-law, relatives, friends, so on and so forth. So these people are the ones who we are fighting this war for. And they are all here. Anyway, they have renounced everything. So what is the point? Now, oftentimes, even in today's world, for example, when I am in my organization, I often have to remind my people that, hey, look at it from wearing the company's hat, wearing the organization hat. Look at it from the organization perspective. Because oftentimes we just choose to look at it from an individual perspective. For example, if we say that because of coronavirus, there is going to be a shutdown, and we say, no, I want to go because I have to achieve something. I want to do something. Then it becomes a thing of, this is me. I want to do this, my individual perspective. Whereas from a nation's perspective, from a community perspective, it is a shutdown. So if we lose the perspective of the community, and if we get too much into our own individual perspective, we lose the sense of purpose completely. And Arjuna is actually again and again repeating what he said. We'll go to verse 35.
एतान् न हन्तुमिच्छामि
एतान् न हन्तुमिच्छामि
नातोऽपि मधुसूदन
नातोऽपि मधुसूदन
अपि त्रैलोक्यराज्यस्य
अपि त्रैलोक्यराज्यस्य
हेतो किं नु मही कृति
हेतो किं नु मही कृते
एतान् न हन्तुमिच्छामि नातोऽपि मधुसूदन अपि त्रैलोक्यराज्यस्य हेतो किं नु मही कृते.
So he says that these people who are my own relatives, I do not wish to kill them. I understand that I am here in the center of the battlefield, Senoyor Ubayor Madhye. So I understand that so if I'm not going to kill them, what's going to happen? Either I have to run away, okay? Just get fleet-footed and get out of there like a coward. But even if I try to run away, these guys are warriors. They are out there to fight. So in all probability, I'm going to get killed. So that's okay, Krishna. Even if they kill me, I have no wish to kill them. And he uses the word, O Madhusudana for Krishna. We'll come to that in a little bit. And even if as a result of killing them, if I were to become the ruler of the three worlds, forget about, becoming the ruler of the earth. Even if I have to become the ruler of all three worlds, I don't wish to kill them. So we noticed that he's referring to Sri Krishna as Madhusudana. Before this, he had referred to Sri Krishna as Govinda. Now, Govinda signifies Krishna's winning back the earth. So Krishna had actually won back the earth, and that is why he was known as Govinda. Go means earth, and Govinda means the Lord of the earth. And that is the context where he says here that forget about the earth. Even if you get the three worlds, I don't want it. That's how Govinda comes here. Another version of Govinda is that Go means Vedas, and Sri Krishna defeated the demon Madhu to secure the Vedas, because the demon Madhu had kind of stolen away the Vedas and was running away. So Go here means the Vedas. Go stands for Vedas, and Govinda is the person who secured the Vedas, who won the Vedas from Madhu. And in the third context, Go means cow. Remember? Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dogda Gopala Nandanaha. So the son of Nanda, the one who gives glee and joy to his mother Devaki, Gopala, Sri Krishna, he milked all the Upanishads, and he is the protector of the cows, the cowherd Govinda. So Go also means cows, and Govinda means the nurturer of the cows. So Sri Krishna in his avatara was actually a cowherd and used to nurture the cows. And to bring Bhagavad Gita, he nurtured the Upanishads, and he took out the nectar of the Bhagavad Gita out of the Upanishads, as we have seen earlier. So Govinda has all these three meanings. We'll go to verse 36.
निहत्य धात्र राष्ट्राना का
Nihatya Dartra Rashtrana
का प्रीति स्यात् जनार्दना
Ka Pritisya Janardana
पापमेवाश्रयेदस्मान्
Papameva Shrayedasman
हत्वेतानाततायिना
Tatvaitana Tatayina
निहत्य धात्र राष्ट्राना का प्रीति स्यात् जनार्दना पापमेवाश्रयेदस्मान् हत्वेतानाततायिनः.
So before I get to this verse, this is very interesting. The names of, in fact, if you can sometimes Google or get hold of a text that has the various names of Sri Krishna, the meaning, the stories behind, why these names are. Remember we talked about Harikatha? So there are so many Harikathas, and through so many of these Harikathas, he has so many innumerable names. They're all very fascinating. Like just the name Govinda has 3 versions and each of them so invigorating to us. And Madhusudana is because he killed the demon Madhu to secure the Vedas. Right? That is why the name Madhusudana in verse 35. So here in verse 36, what do we see? So Arjuna says, killing who? Killing these sons, Dhartarashtrana, the sons of Dhartarashtra, Nihatya, after having slain them. After having slain who? The sons of Dhritarashtra. What pleasure can be ours? And here he uses Janardana for Sri Krishna. And he says that only papam, that is sin. Papam alone will be our gain by killing these atatayina. Atatayina means felons. So he actually calls them felons. Felons are people who commit extremely ignoble deeds. And he calls them felons, but he says that killing the felons will cause sin to us. Now later on in chapter 2, Bhagavan Sri Krishna explains a very beautiful concept of what sin is. It's one of my favorites, and we'll get to that. We have to be patient. But he says that killing the sons of Dhritarashtra, there can be no pleasure, and it will only give us sins. Now felons, like I said, are people who perform completely ignoble deeds. Now there are 6 known kinds of crimes that if an individual commits, then that person is called atatayina or is called a felon. And according to there is this Indian treatise in Sanskrit that is called Arthashastra. According to the Arthashastra, which is very ancient, and it is basically a treatise on statecraft. How do we run your kingdom? Economic policy. How do you keep your kingdom prosperous? And military strategy. How do you strategize to defend and to attack if required? So that is the fundamental, dealing of Arthashastra. And it is clearly stated in Arthashastra that people who commit these 6 criminal activities, they are called felons and they should be killed. It's very, very clear. The punishment is killing. The punishment is death. And these are, number 1, setting another person on fire. 2, giving poison to another person. The third one is brandishing weapons and threatening another. The 4th is taking away another person's wealth. The 5th is taking away another's land. And the 6th is taking away another person's wife. Now, Duryodhana has committed all these 6 crimes. He actually sent the Pandavas, he invited them to this beautiful palace that he had built for them, which was built of lakhs, and he set it on fire. His entire objective was to kill all of them, including Draupadi, who was no one but his aunt. He wanted to set them on fire and kill them. He actually got his person to serve poison to Bhima. He made Bhima have poison. When Sri Krishna went as an emissary, this is the 3rd one, brandishing weapons, threatening someone else. Now, Duryodhana has done this multiple times, but the worst example of Duryodhana committing this crime was when Sri Krishna went as an emissary before the beginning of the war to make that last pitch to avoid this war. And that is the time he offered to the Kauravas, offered to Duryodhana, please give 5 villages to the Pandavas. He said no. Then Krishna said, please give them 5 huts. And Duryodhana said, I will not even give them land on which a pin can stand. And at that time, Duryodhana brandished his weapons and ordered his soldiers to arrest Krishna. First of all, it is a crime to arrest an emissary. Even in today's diplomatic circles, when someone is coming to you as a diplomat, diplomats are even protected from the laws of the nation through the diplomatic advantage that they have. So an emissary should not be arrested, number 1. Number two, this is Sri Krishna. And they all knew who Sri Krishna is. So that is the level that Duryodhana got to. Taking away his one wealth, not only of the Pandavas, but also of the citizens. Duryodhana was very well known that if somebody had something that he wanted to possess, that's it, he got it from them. Any citizen, any subject of his kingdom. Taking away others' land, Indraprastha, by cheating. Taking away somebody else's wife, Draupadi, enticing Yudhishthira to put her on stake and then dragging her into the darbar. So these are criminal activities that Duryodhana has already committed, and he earned the title of Atatayana based on all these activities. So as per Artha Shastra, Arjuna should hesitate not even a second to kill him. He deserved to be killed. But here Arjuna is saying that no good will come out of it. Verse 37.
Tasmanarha vayam hantum.
Tasmanarha vayam hantum.
Dhatrarashtan swabandhavan.
Dhartarashtran swabandhavan.
Swajanam hi katam hatva.
Swajanam hi khatam hatva.
Sukhinashyama madhava.
Sukhinashyama madhava.
Tasmanarha vayam hantum. Dhatrarashtan swabandhavan. Swajanam hi katam hatva. Sukhinashyama madhava.
So Arjuna now concludes this argument of his. Okay, with this statement he concludes. He says, therefore, because of all that I have listed out, because of all that I have said, therefore, Tasman, therefore, we should not kill the sons of Dhritarashtra, who are no one else but our relatives. Why? Because how can we ever be happy by killing our own people? O Madhava. So he essentially concludes his second argument with this verse. The first argument was, remember, Nimittani, which is I see omens, bad omens. Nashreyo, I don't see any good coming out of this. That was his first argument based on delusion. The second argument based on delusion comes from Swajanam, my own, my people. And with this, he concludes that second argument also. Not only that, he actually tries to make a personal appeal. You know why? Because he has been going on and on. Remember, Duryodhana was going on and on in front of Dronacharya. What was Dronacharya doing? Silence. He didn't utter a word. Similarly, Krishna, silence. He is not uttering a word. Arjuna is just, diarrhea of words, going on and on and on. But Sri Krishna is silent. And this is now come to notice of Arjuna. After such a long time, I am going on and Krishna is saying nothing. So that begins to bother him. So he actually makes an appeal, a personal appeal to Sri Krishna. He actually almost begs him to endorse his views. And that's the second line. Swajanam hi katam hatva. Sukhina syama madhava. O Madhava, by killing these people who are my kinsmen, after having killed them, how is it that I am going to be happy? How are we going to be happy? Please see this. O Madhava. Remember earlier we talked about what is the meaning of Madhava? Ma-dhava. Ma means Lakshmi and Dhava means husband. The husband of Lakshmi. He is referring to Sri Krishna. You are also a family man, Sri Krishna. You are also a husband. You also have a wife. Let us please empathize. Let us please look at it from the perspective of family members. But Sri Krishna still remains silent. We will see, because Sri Krishna is silent, now Arjuna will go into another next rung of deluded arguments. And that we will see the next time. Thank you. Hari Om. We will do the prayer.
Om asato ma sadgamaya तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरि ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः हरि ओम
Hari Om. Thank you. You can unmute yourself. You can switch on the video. We can have a discussion for the remaining time. Any thoughts, comments?
Hi, Uncle. I have a thought.
Hi, Sakshi.
Hi. Okay, so now basically sorrow has consumed Arjuna. He's delusional and he's making all of these, according to his perception, logical argument as to why he shouldn't kill his family or kinsmen. But now is he forgetting his dharma in that process then? Because as a warrior, he's supposed to punish them, right?
Yes, absolutely. Your question is over?
Yeah.
Yes. So, yes, he is blinded to his dharma. He's
So then-
completely blinded to his dharma, which he remembered very well till he was out there looking into the eyes of Bhishma and Dronacharya.
Yeah, when he was asking to take my chariot to the middle of the battleground. So all of a sudden, why did he forget his dharma?
We will see that. Be a little bit more patient. We will see that. But we already have seen part of it. First thing is when he looked at the army, he went there to inspect. He went there to find out who is going to kill, who is going to fight. But he saw his guru, he saw his grandsire, he saw his uncles and aunts, he saw who were the fathers and sons and grandsons. So he saw relatives. So the first thing that struck him was a sense of sorrow that these people are going to get killed. And that sense of sorrow made him forget his dharma. One. The second thing was the delusion. The delusion that these are my people. I cannot kill them. What is it that am I going to get? I don't even want what I'll get out of it. So he forgot about the other commitments that he has made. He forgot about people, the subjects of the state who are dependent on him, the citizens of the country that are dependent on him, his own wife that is dependent on him. He forgot about everything and he forgot about his dharma as a soldier. And he said that I don't need any of the outcomes of the war, any of the phala of the war, any of the bhoga or the joys and pleasures that I will get. So I don't want to fight. So the sorrow and the delusion got him blinded to what his duty was.
Okay, but I want to actually make a parallel to a real life situation, but I'll discuss that one-on-one with you separately.
Sure, but yeah, if you want to mention it, you can.
No, I'll discuss it separately personally with you.
Okay, okay, Sakshi.
Srini?
Hi, Petra.
Yeah, hi. I have also a question to the sorrow. I don't know if I understood it properly, but you said by the first symptom of the sorrow, we should just throw them out or throw them away. So this is the advice of Bhagavad Gita, like generally, can we take it generally? Like if you have the first symptom of a sorrow, you should throw it away from you or just, is it correct?
Would say, yes,
Yeah.
I would say yes, that is correct.
Okay.
It is one of the messages, one of the innumerable messages of Bhagavad Gita that at the first sign of sorrow, it's almost like food getting regurgitated from us. Just throw it out, because if we don't throw it out, then it kind of ferments in our mind. And if it ferments to a point where it takes possession of our faculties, then it leads to delusion. So the best thing for us to do is, if I get that first sense, it's like saying, if I feel that irritation in my throat, the first thing I do, the first initial sign of getting a cold or a cough, I go and do salt water, warm water gargling, or I may take a steam inhalation, and that greatly helps. 8 out of 10 times I'm able to prevent the flu from getting into me. So if I'm able to recognize a symptom and treat it before it takes over my faculties, I am better off. Similarly, sorrow is not something that is going to lead us to any good. So if I'm able to recognize the initial symptoms of sorrow, deal with it. So in my mind, I will feel that unhappiness, the sadness. I have to think thoughts that remove that sadness. How can you do that? You can replace sad thoughts with happy thoughts. You can replace sad thoughts by maybe reciting some bhajan. You can replace sad thoughts by thinking about Bhagavad Gita and thinking about how Arjuna, the great warrior was. We will see in future that he's actually able to replace the sorrow and the delusion and come back and perform his duty. So we can look at successful examples, success stories that are around us. And those are the ways in which we can remove that sorrow out of our mind.
Because my opinion is different, but I don't want to.
Your opinion is that let it pass.
Yeah,
let
I think sorrow.
You.
If you feel a sorrow, it's an emotion, right? And I think it's okay to feel the emotions because they want to tell us something. So I think you shouldn't deny them or throw them away. Yeah.
True.
So that's why
I understand what you're saying. If you have reached a level of evolution, if you have reached a level of maturity where you can recognize the emotion of sorrow, deal with it and let it pass and move on in life, then I'm telling you, you have reached a very high level of human evolution. Most people have not reached that level of human evolution. Okay. If you are there, good for you. But even if you are there, even at that level, by the way, Arjuna was at a very high level of human evolution. But if you allow it to take possession of your faculties, that is why this term possession, then it will impair your performing of your duty. So even if you let it stay, you recognize it and let it pass, as long as it does not interfere with your performing duties, as long as it does not take possession of you and impair you in terms of your faculties, that means you have evolved greatly, Petra. Most people are not.
I think even the bad emotions have something to say. So I think it's not good to deny them or to throw them away. That's why I was a little bit confused.
Yeah. I think the point is, you don't get delusional with those bad emotions then. Or at least you try not to, because if you do, then you lose a sense of logic. That's what we're seeing, right?
As long as you are in control of your emotions, it is okay. Our scriptures do not say that we should not experience the world. We should not experience the emotions. We should experience everything out there, which is a creation of God, is to be experienced. So we must experience. But the faculty of controlling should be within us, not that we succumb to the emotion. If we succumb to the emotion, then it does interfere in not only our performing of our duty, but it will also interfere in our well-being. You should not allow it to go to that extreme.
Right.
Yeah, I think you shouldn't identify with them, but you can allow them, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, that's a very high level of evolution.
Thank you.
I have another thought.
Yes.
What is our dharma? I don't know what my dharma is.
Actually, we discussed this last time, remember?
I zoned out last time a little bit.
I'm sorry?
I zoned out last time when we were having that discussion.
Right. Okay. So that's another thing that we should talk offline too. Then we should revise what we went through last time.
Okay.
And also the next class, I'm expecting to complete it fairly soon. Okay. The next satsang. The remaining verses we'll get done in about 20 minutes or so. And then we can use some of the remaining time to discuss these points, including dharma. But quickly, Sakshi, we have to discover, we have to find out what our dharma is. Like we said, what is dharma? Dharma is that innate aspect that lets me be who I am For example, we used the example of that light and heat are the dharma of the sun. We do not acknowledge, we do not know of a cold, dark sun. It doesn't exist. So something without which I do not exist and something because of which I am what I am is dharma. And each one of us has to find our dharma. And one of the most commonly accepted definitions of dharma is that ultimate purushartha that we talked about. You know, the parama purushartha, which is nothing but long-lasting happiness or eternal happiness and deep happiness that touches your core. If we get to that, we will automatically know what our dharma is. So yeah, it's a process through life where we discover what it is.
How will you reach that without knowing what your duty is in this lifetime? I mean, like, I have to go through a process to figure out what my duty is, what I'm here for, and then eventually through that process, I will reach the the happiness state.
Purushartha, yeah. So yeah, that's a good point too. So that's why we also talked about the other definitions of dharma. How to live righteously, how to do what you're supposed to do. For example, in this satsang, I took the example of the judge, the surgeon, the soldier. So there are some dharmas that are defined based on your role. So the dharma of the judge is to protect the law of the land. If the judge is protecting a criminal against the law of the land, then he is not doing his dharma. If a surgeon is getting emotional about operating her own kin, let's say her husband or her son, and does not do a good job of it, then she is not protecting her dharma, which is the Hippocratic oath. So role dharma also gets defined by the role of society, of the role that you play in the society. And the individual dharma, which is extremely close to each one of us, is something that we have to discover over our lifetime.
Is there a process of discovery?
Yes, it is a process of discovery.
No, what is that process?
Go through the entire Bhagavad Gita and let Bhagavad Gita go through you. That is the process.
Okay.
Just you going through Bhagavad Gita is not enough. You need to let Bhagavad Gita go through you.
Okay.
Any other thoughts, comments?
So, Srini, you are not suggesting we have to chew through. You have to chew through Bhagavad Gita.
Chew through our Gita. Okay. Yeah, you have to chew and trust Deepak to come up with the food analogy of anything. Hey Deepak, switch on your video also. Yeah, there you are.
Food is my dharma.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Srini, isn't delusion a matter of perception?
No, delusion is not a matter of perception. If delusion is there and if it is obvious, then it is no longer a matter of perception. If it is a matter of perception, then it would be something else.
What would it be then?
It depends on the specific example or situation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anytime, so what is delusion? Delusion is, we talked about it, right? Wrong thinking. Assuming that something is what it is not. So when you say that it is wrong thinking, when you say that I am perceiving something which is not true to its nature is well established, it's known. And I am the one who is not perceiving it in the right manner. So delusion is delusion. It can't be perception.
But if I'm not perceiving it in the right manner, I mean, that is causing delusion then, right? So perception, not perceiving it, is having an incorrect perception about it, which may result to delusion then, wouldn't it?
That's right. Yes. True. So in today we saw that, when you, in fact, it's the next step, the sense organs perceive, and then the process when what you perceive through your sense organ goes through the objective mind, the intellect, and the subjective mind. That process is where you make the assumptions and the dictations where you could go wrong in terms of what is, and that causes delusion.
Okay.
Actually, if you go through Arjuna's condition again and again, it becomes very, very clear. Because Arjuna's condition is an extreme condition. How many people have to kill their uncle or grandfather or grandson? Very, very few. Hi, Esteban.
Wait, say hi.
Hi.
Hello. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Srini,
Yeah.
yeah, I was just wanting to see, that means dharma at a time, place, and individual differs. So like, I can just say, like, you're a Brahmin, so you're giving teaching, but you joined the army, so that time you're doing Kshatriya's role. Like, I'm Kshatriya, so I've joined the army, and now doing this, and with respect to my wife, I can't be a Kshatriya. So means with each person it varies.
Absolutely. So that's what I talked. You're done with your comment, the question? Yeah. So actually, I think it is chapter 4, and because after the class, I'm a little, I think it is chapter 4. So Sri Krishna talks very beautifully about, different roles, the caste system, quote unquote, which is perceived so badly, but which degraded into where it is today. But originally, when it was formed, it was a very beautiful concept of, society able to function in the most efficient manner based on the capabilities of the people. By the way, no one is born a Kshatriya, no one is born a Brahmana, no one is born a Shudra, no one is born a Vaishya. Janma is not the criteria for that. It's actually karma. It is actually what you do is what makes you who you are. And in that sense, what you said, JV sir, is absolutely correct. So the role determines your dharma to a great extent. So the role of the sun is to provide light and heat to the solar system. If its role was something else, then it may not have been a hot, light, filled with light body, right? It could have been a cold, dark, celestial body, like the moon.
Okay.
The moon does not have its own light. So because of its role, it has that dharma. Okay, time now is 5:35. If no one else has anything, we can call it a day for today.
Srini, we had to discuss this point, maybe not today, next time, about this perception and delusion, because the person who is deluded, he does not consider himself to be deluded, or other way around. If I have argument with somebody, I can always say I always think the other person is deluded, where that other person says he's fine. He thinks I am deluded. So it's a perception from that perspective, right? But there is something fundamental here. You talked about there are these subject object. So what is that framework? Probably we have to revise that, come to that, and come to that. Everyone should come to the same conclusion that this is a delusion. Or what is that? Is there a bigger framework like dharma, where we have to do every act, every thought has to filter through that, and then we know, so how to practically come to that, litmus test? Is it a delusional thinking, or is it?
Sure. So this is very beautiful. The concept of sorrow and delusion is really beautiful. Now, sorrow is something that you will have inside you. Okay. I may not know that you have sorrow inside you, or let's put it the other way around. I may have a lot of sorrow inside me. You may not know, But sorrow is something, it's like a pressure cooker, okay? As the steam keeps building up inside the pressure cooker endlessly, at some point in time, it just bursts out. So sorrow is a faculty, sorrow is an element that will at some point or the other burst out for everyone to see. Sorrow is not something that a human being can hold on forever to. It builds, the steam keeps getting built up till the point that it bursts. But a person can be deluded and remain deluded and pass away from this world deluded. So delusion is something where the deluded person thinks, in fact, the more deluded you are, the more, some psychiatrists will tell you that the more deluded you are, the more you will think that you are right. But how do we know? The common elements will help us know, which is two in nature. One is that if I am having that perception that I am not deluded, and if I think that XYZ is having a perception that I am deluded, but if I am able to verify it with another 20 people, then obviously, 20:1 ratio is fairly good to know that who is deluded and who is not. That is one way. The other way is that life is a sequence of events. Life is not one event is done, gone, and another life comes in place, okay? It's a sequence of events, and in fact, people believe that the sequence continues beyond the current life to another birth, and so on and so forth. So in these sequence of events, if it gets established that what I thought day before yesterday was not true, it was an assumption which was wrong, and I was deluded, then it is pretty obvious. And often you don't have to reinvent the wheel again and again. In my situation, I should know because of experience of other people, because of the forefathers, because what is there in society, we get to know whether what is right, what is wrong, and so on and so forth. So if I insist on breaking the traffic light again and again and again and again, the delusion lies in me. That's pretty obvious because of the set rationale in the society. So these are the things that help us know whether we are deluded, we are not deluded, or ABC is deluded or not deluded. But yes, it is very true that when you are under delusion, it can go on for a long period of time. That is very, very true.
Sometimes you also sort of ignore that state of delusion. Ignorance takes over you. And then
exactly. That's the first one, right? Adhyana. The first cause of delusion is ignorance.
Okay.
It comes from ignorance and it goes back into ignorance. So you get deluded because you're ignorant, and you get ignorant because you're deluded. So it's a vicious cycle. And the vicious cycle is all those four elements. Ajnana, aham mama, that is I and my, shoka, moha, leading to swadharmanasha.
Okay, I have to go. Thank you so much for today's session. Uncle, I'll talk to you one-on-one.
Sure. In fact, it's 5:40. I think we can all take leave. Thank you all. Hari Om, and see you next Saturday.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, Srini.
Thank you, Srini.
Bye.
Thank you, Sarika.